Hi everyone here, Marta Segura here. Before we begin, we'd like to recognize the Tangba Hashemen nations as the first stewards and the traditional caretakers of this land we call Los Angeles. I recognize that the original stewards are manifested in our culture today and remain active caretakers of our land, water, air, and of all living things. This statement is but a stepping stone to honor them and recognize that we must be true stewards of this land and learn from them. We have failed in so many ways, but thank you, ancestors, for the lessons and also for your patience. Once again, thank you all for joining us and welcome to the Climate Equity LA series. We're really excited about our event this evening. We have some phenomenal speakers lined up, but before we go there, I do want to recognize that today is Earth Day, and this is our Earth Month series, and it's the 52nd anniversary of Earth Day. And it's really hard to believe that it was launched under a Republican administration and that this same GOP president gave us the Environmental Protection Agency. I hope we can get back to the point where we can expect all of our leaders, no matter the party, to be champions for the climate and for equity and be stewards of the land and be equal stewards of the land once more. The Climate Equity LA series on community-driven climate resilience is our way of celebrating and honoring Earth Day and all that means to our people and all of our communities across the world. Today, we're focused on how we align climate investments from cities like Los Angeles by listening to community voices and what they advise and need us to do. We have amazing presenters and an engaging dialogue planned for all of us. I want to thank everyone for their contributions and hard work to move the agenda of equitable climate policy forward and for being here this evening. Also, I want to thank especially our anchor organizations such as Liberty Hill, CBE, SCOPE, Pacoima Beautiful, the Leap LA Coalition, and our allies like NCSA, the Neighborhood Councils, the Cool Blocks Initiative, the Mayor's Office, and UCLA, and so many others who are facilitating and note-taking tonight and helping to promote the series. Also, I want to thank our amazing curriculum design committees for all the 3 parts of our series were co-developed and co-designed by community leaders. And we must collaborate because as we engage at all of these levels and across borders, we know that climate change and pollution don't recognize these jurisdictions or borders. Thus, governments must be as seamless and equitable as possible in the execution of our policies and services and address worker justice and economic rights and benefits so that all can contribute and also be a part of the solution to save our planet. Next. Okay, this is our Sibo Vision, and it states that we want to co-create and have a collaborative and innovative and equitable community-led design to create community climate resilience. Our goal will put community leadership and their voices first, and assure that we develop a collaborative governance structure between community stakeholders and the City of LA, and thus create agency and leadership in our communities. This is how we will more meaningfully engage community voices at City Hall. This series is an example of bottom-up policy design, and we hope you will provide your valued input and suggestions. Systems change requires a unified approach from all people at all levels. The model we are creating is derived from a resident identified needs model, giving community members much more ownership over policies that will bring more climate relief from excessive heat, smoke, and air pollution, and that will help save lives and hopefully lower hospitalizations and untimely deaths with concepts such as equitable and community design cooling and resilience hubs, financing for retrofits of older and existing buildings and installing ACs and smoke and air pollution filtration systems, by creating local workforces that transition from an oil-based economy to a renewable energy economy, and hopefully creating heat and climate resilience mapping so that we can request and expect more state and federal funding for LA in the future. Next. Next slide, please. And this is our innovative governance model. And I won't go through the whole process, but basically what you see here is that the policies that we identified as priorities for the Climate Equity LA series came from the community leaders themselves. And once we started the process, we went back to community leaders to be part of our curriculum design team. And they shared their knowledge as to how we should design the curriculum that you're experiencing today. We also made sure to put polling surveys and focus groups into the process so that we could gather data, analyze it, and create a report, a recommendations and findings report that will then be delivered to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission, which I will talk about shortly. And then finally, this commission is advisory to the City Council. So the recommendations and findings from these dialogues in the small groups and the surveys and the polls and the focus groups will go to the City Council to help shape equitable climate policy. Next. This is an example of what we mean by equitable climate policy: creating meaningful engagement and civic-led governance, shaping recommendations for equitable climate policies, and coordinating and collaborating with city leaders to bring an equity lens to not just LA's Green New Deal, but all future climate policy. And then finally, the commission will deliver an equitable climate action roadmap so that it can guide its work throughout the years and also guide and shape policy at the City of Los Angeles. Next. This is just our commission slide, and I won't go into detail here, but I'm very proud that it's very representative of the most pollution burdened segments of Los Angeles that were identified by the Callan virus screen methodology created by the state of California. And the reason that that's important is because we want our commissions to be representative of the communities that have experienced the most disinvestment and the highest levels of pollution, so that they can share experiences and therefore share solutions and visions on how to create equitable climate policy. We also have labor, climate experts, and health experts represented here, and youth. And the commission will be launched this July. So we're, my team and the city are working really hard to ensure that this very new commission has training and is ready to deliberate on these really important recommendations. Next. And this is part of our history. The LEAP LA Coalition, comprised of CBE, Scope, Pacoima Beautiful, Esperanza Community Housing, PSRLA, and the American Indian Movement, were all part of the evolution of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. Before it became an ordinance, before it became an office, these organizations were pushing for a model that would lift the voices of the grassroots and lift the voices across Los Angeles to ensure we create policies that do not have unintended consequences. Next. These are the overarching contexts for our climate resilience series. We want to ensure that frontline communities have a strong voice, that we have equitable climate resilience strategies and policies to prevent, mitigate, and undo impacts from cumulative pollution burdens and disinvestments. We want to convey that cumulative impacts and their role exacerbates climate risks. We want to convey that decades of work of environmental justice advocates have brought us to this point where environmental justice is now something the Biden administration has integrated fully into their infrastructure investments and their EPA and other climate policies that are trickling down to states, which we hope to align with at the City of LA and create a role model for other cities. And we want to convey that the role of environmental racism and historical disinvestments has created the unequal exposure, unequal pollution burden, and unequal climate risks and health impacts on frontline communities. Next. And this is kind of self-explanatory. It shows that race is a significant factor in predicting where a person lives and the correlation with contaminated air, water, and soil. 56% of the population is people of color that live near toxic waste sites, right? And 95% of their claims against polluters are currently denied by the EPA. 38% of them have higher nitrogen dioxide exposures, and they're twice as likely to live without potable water and modern sanitation. And this is representative of what's happening today. Next. So just to end the introduction, I want to say that the speakers that we have here today are by design. They are all champions for equitable climate policy, and each of them has a story to tell about how they have worked with their respective communities to increase engagement and collaboration as we design equitable climate solutions for the future. But I'd like to start today with Gloria Medina, the Executive Director of SCOPE, and she's going to share with us examples of her organization, their work, and particularly from South Los Angeles. Gloria, would you start us off?
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. This has been a journey, work of love that we have done to get us to this point, to have this space, these conversations, and to have a climate emergency mobilization office in the city of LA. So let me begin quickly just by setting some context, providing some context of who we are, and also why we are part of this conversation. So for almost 30 years, SCOPE has been organizing Black, Brown, South Los Angeles residents. And we have been doing that to address the historical economic inequities. Our mission is to build grassroots power to create social and economic justice for low-income immigrant, women, femme, Black, and Brown communities in Los Angeles. And so to do this, the work that SCOPE does is to organize communities, to develop leaders, to collaborate through strategic alliances. And we focus on building the capacity through training programs and educating the South LA community so that they can have an active role in shaping policies. The policies that affect the quality of life in our region. So what I would love to say first and make sure that I elevate is that I am here representing SCOPE's amazing, committed grassroots base. They are the power behind the work that we do. They are the ones that lead the work that we do and are committed to reaching out and educating others in South Los Angeles. So the reason why I share all of this is because I do want to elevate that we have been, over the years, historically, in our organization, we have been focused on community-based solutions. And this is key for the work that we're doing. And the community-based solutions that we have been working on are to address health disparities and the lack of sustainable career pathways in South Los Angeles. For many people, Los Angeles represents a vibrant community, a city with many opportunities, but this is not the same economy that residents in South LA live with. This is not the reality of South LA. In fact, it's a strikingly different economy. And communities like South LA, right? Other communities that we organize with, like Boyle Heights and Wilmington and the Northeast Valley in Los Angeles, have been left behind, not only economically, but also in terms of health and life expectancy. And so I say all of this because we cannot have a conversation about climate resilience without taking into account everything else that really impacts the lives of community members in these areas. So for the past 15 years, SCOPE has increasingly organized and invested in the development of grassroots leadership to address the climate crisis and the environmental impacts. Because for us, it is very clear that there is an intersection right there between economic equity and climate justice. It is very evident. And we know also that it is imperative, it's extremely important for communities that are the first and the hardest hit by climate change that they should be at the forefront of these solutions. They should be creating the solutions. There is absolutely no other way around this if we want to be effective. So we cannot talk about, again, climate resilience without acknowledging all of these intersections and all of these different areas of impact. Historically, the communities that I mentioned, the community that I belong to in South LA, have been grappling with a wide range of inequities. Many families in our community live with constant crisis, dealing with personal emergencies and dealing with community emergencies. So for South LA, this idea of community resilience is not a new concept. And it is not solely connected to climate. It is connected to being resilient, to surviving, living in a community and being part of a community that has been disinvested. So families have had to withstand, have had to adapt to, and recover from adversity across multiple issues and across multiple generations. However, residents are now, as we know, facing additional growing threat because of climate. 9% of Angelenos in this live in a census tract within the highest combined rate of population and poverty. Again, there's that intersection across the whole state. And 1 in 3 of those Angelenos lives in South Los Angeles. So the threat of climate is not only real, but it is physically evident, and it impacts the economic sustainability and the health outcomes of our families. So what we have heard from our residents, what are we hearing? Is that, we have heard this through our community engagement, and it is that every year it is much more difficult for families to protect their children and their loved ones from heat waves, that they are facing increased health problems due to pollution, that they are facing economic instability due to the lack of affordable utility. We're talking about water and energy, basic needs, and that they face difficulty in assessing emergency services due to language and transportation. So we must acknowledge all this as we try to adapt to climate crisis. We are dealing with structural racism. We need to acknowledge that. We are dealing with economic inequity, and we are dealing with a broken democratic process, even within our city. And this is why community resilience is so important. We need to ensure that communities have a space, or as we call them, hubs, where they can come and cool off. They can power up in a power outage, but more importantly, we need a place where they can learn about what these threats are. They can together come and develop solutions for recovery and for creating a regenerative new economy that includes them and does not leave them behind. So just to close really quickly, given this reality, we believe that the best solutions to prepare for extreme hazard is that we need to do something, right? And we need to do it now. However, I want to say very importantly, however, we must ensure that we are not precipitated, but rather that we're thoughtful, and that we cannot implement plans that would potentially create additional burdens for disinvested communities, even if they're not intentional, right? Even if they're unintentional burdens. So we must, as a city, what could we do? As a city, we must ensure that this process that we're part of now, this process to address climate, we must make sure that this process has these key imperatives. One is that it is committed to equity, that those most impacted are at the forefront, that it uplifts place-based solutions, that it's grounded in democratic process, and that it includes a collaborative partnership with city collaborating with community-based organizations and collaborating with communities directly. And that these plans need to address systemic racism, and that they need to strategically shift the power dynamics so that our community members are at the forefront of solution making.
Great, thank you so much, Gloria. Those are powerful and wise words to start us off. Next, Luis, I'd like to introduce Luis Martinez from Communities for a Better Environment. and he's a care organizer. And he's done a lot of great work and outreach in consultation with communities on climate resilience, along with Laura Gracia from CB, who earlier shared the results of that information and that data. So Luis, what has your survey data found are the biggest concerns of Wilmington residents regarding climate change and environmental threats?
Yeah, thank you, Martha, for that question. Hi, everyone. I'm Luis with CB. So our research last year through the survey that we conducted in Wilmington found that the usual climate impacts that are of concern to California residents, such as earthquakes and wildfires, are of course concerns for folks in Wilmington, right? That seems to be clear and that makes sense. But then the impacts named after earthquakes that folks are really, really concerned about in their community, specifically of Wilmington, are industrial impacts, right? Such as air pollution, refinery flaring, and oil drilling. So we have to remember that environmental justice communities like Wilmington, right? They face year-round pollution from these industries. The biggest being polluted air from the presence of refineries. There are episodes of flaring, heavy truck traffic due to the port neighboring Wilmington, and oil drilling contributions as well. So since folks face health impacts from these industries year round, whenever a climate impact does occur, such as an earthquake or a big wildfire, that is going to further harm folks in addition to the harm that's already being done every single day by these industries. So as the city sort of grapples with creating a strong buffer zone between industry and community and taking action to phase out fossil fuels and bringing clean energy into the fold, we know that on the daily in our communities, we're supporting right now by building up our resilience and preparedness. So if you can please show the next slide, that'd be great. Thank you. So our community members want to be resilient by prioritizing emergency preparedness tools and what Laura and I have been started calling resilience kits. And these resilience kits essentially consist of personal protection equipment and first aid supplies. And we have been able to distribute them to Wilmington residents when we collected surveys. We have also been able to collaborate with local mutual aid organizations in such a way where we have supported them in distributing these kits to unhoused residents of Los Angeles as well, since unhoused folks in Wilmington are also experiencing climate and industrial impacts to a very harmful degree. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So these kits have been representative of the kinds of resources that they would want to have in a resilience hub. And to name a few, they are first aid kits, they're earthquake kits, they're generators, right? Flashlights, air filtration, water, food, supportive staff, etc., right? And although depending on the site and depending on the solar infrastructure, maybe not all of these resources can be provided. But as Gloria was mentioning, that I completely support, is that that's why it's important to have community deciding what resources are the most priority for their neighborhood. And that's because the needs of Wilmington are not going to be the needs of Watts, the needs of, for example, the needs of Inglewood, right? Or the needs of other communities in Los Angeles. So thank you.
Thank you, Luis. I really appreciate that insight from CBE and the communities of Wilmington. And it's true, every community has similarities, but not every community has the same exact needs. And it's really important to hear what those needs are. So next, I'd like to turn over to Alex Trek. He's the Executive Director of Grid Alternatives, and I'd like him to chime in on the work that he's done in building resilience hubs and the lessons that he's learned working with communities like CBE and so many others like Pacoima Beautiful in these last couple of years, and acknowledging that it was a pandemic season as well. So the challenge was even exacerbated by the pandemic, but I'm sure that we have a lot to learn from Alex. Alex, all yours.
Yes, thank you, Marta, and good evening, everyone. Thank you for Luis and Gloria and the other panelists. It's really such an important framework to kind of build upon. I think it's so important that community comes first in the planning of these resilience centers. It's really those that are going to be benefiting from the deployment of them. I'm going to be speaking from a more technical standpoint. We actually just turned on our first, quote unquote, resilience center at a senior center in Wilmington. And, resilience in terms for my organization, beyond the definitions that Luis and Gloria mentioned, from the technical standpoint, it's really the combination of solar and storage to provide energy when the grid goes down. And there's populations that are increasingly at risk who depend on a constant and consistent power supply that rely on energy for really life and death situations. So one example I'll bring up is the one we just turned on earlier this year at the Wilmington Senior Center. We worked with the nonprofit, the JC's Foundation, who serves the seniors of Wilmington, to really determine which critical loads would be vital to backing up for the folks that they serve, the seniors that they serve, really, the population that is going to be extremely at risk if the power is to go down. We determined outlets for cell phone charging, outlets for medical equipment like oxygen tanks and other medical equipment like that, mobile air conditioning and lighting. And, really this was tailored to the folks that they served, and the decisions that were made in the design of the system were based off the feedback from the senior center and the folks they serve. So I think that's key and kind of speaks to, what Luis and Gloria were speaking about. And it's really tailoring this community resource for the community in which it's in. So very excited that that's been turned on earlier this year and is now a resource to the community of Wilmington. Like you mentioned, I think COVID really limited our ability to do a proper outreach. And that's one thing we've learned for sure. And we have a few more solar and storage resilience centers in the pipeline that we're excited to really be able to conduct that community outreach. And like I mentioned, it's really the determination of the critical loads and the backup power that's going to be supplying the community during a time of blackouts. I think prioritizing those that are most vulnerable and at risk, including the seniors, like I mentioned, including others with health who face health issues, medical lifeline customers. I think LADWP has a kind of a wealth of data, which would be a good starting point to see which of their customers really depend on their energy from a medical standpoint. So I think prioritizing, obviously, the communities that Luis and Gloria represent and are kind of throughout the city of Los Angeles, who face these environmental and economic injustices, face these environmental hazards like the flaring at the refineries in Wilmington, and who face a greater threat to the effects of climate change, like extreme heat. I think we really have to work hard to prioritize, number one, the communities, and then within those communities, the most at-risk populations, because I think hoping funding will be available soon. And I think we have to be really, deliberate with where we invest those dollars to the highest need communities and community members.
That's great, Alex. Thank you so much. And I want to point out to the audience that there are very few nonprofit organizations that have the expertise of grid alternatives to partner with nonprofit organizations and frontline communities to ensure that there is a partner that has the capacity to do this. However, unfortunately, we have another amazing nonprofit organization with great capacity to support the building of resilience centers with us tonight, and that's the United States Green Building Council of Los Angeles. And its executive director, Ben Stapleton, is here to share with us and tell us about the Boyle Heights Resilience Center example. And the question that I'd like to ask him is, could you please tell us what kind of training and capacity building that's culturally relevant has been used by the U.S. Green Building Council for the Boyle Heights model, and also any other lessons that you learned from the Boyle Heights model? Thanks, Ben.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marta, for having us here today. And it's exciting to be here with so many just great community partners. I'm a native Angelino. I grew up here in the Valley, and this work is just so critically important for all of us right now. And it's a privilege to be able to do this work here in the city. In the community of Boyle Heights, we've been working on the Resilience Hub there for about 2+ years now, maybe almost 3, with some partners at the City of LA, with American Red Cross, and the community with which the hub is housed, which is the Boyle Heights Arts Conservancy, which has done a great job of really providing a safe space for those in the community to come and learn, not only learn about how to make their own music and their own art, but also be able to work on their homework and just have a place to go that is cool when it's hot outside. And I think I think sometimes we get too focused on, I'm speaking from the U.S. Green Building Council, but we get a little too focused on the buildings and not enough on the people. And we can put in amazing systems and spend money on technology, but we need to be spending as much time, if not more, on really working with the people in those buildings so they understand not only how to use that equipment, but how to create the networks with each other that are almost more important in the event of a disaster. So we've developed training over the last couple of years with a fellow we had working on resiliency that's around community capacity building. And you can define your community any way you want. It could be your family, your business, your religious group, your school, but really helping people figure out, what happens in the event of a disaster. How do you leverage the networks you do have? Who can you go to in an emergency, and who needs help? How do you help those that maybe aren't as capable as you in the event of that kind of disaster? And then, thinking about how that integrates back with the resources that are the building. So in the community of Boyle Heights, we've done multiple surveys with our partner Climate Resolve on this project, and really try to identify, what does the community want? And high heat days, really up there as a topic of focus. But mental health was an issue that was really identified by the community as something of importance. I think we've all experienced that during COVID over the last couple of years, and being something that we've all been challenged with in different ways. And addressing mental health, if there is a disaster, we can have emergency charging, we can have refrigerated storage for medicine, but if we don't have some of the resources and training to help those who are dealing with mental challenges in a stressful situation, it's not going to help us as much as it needs to. So we've been taking that into an account. From a building perspective, there's been some great tactical methods and projects mentioned here, whether it's energy storage or solar. I want to encourage us to think about water and having access to clean water, water filtration, really, really important in these projects. And also, how do we create signage and, the types of resources people know what's available and where, and it's clear in the event of a disaster. That's been something we've been really thinking through a lot. Because we can put a lot of great resources there. Unless people know they're there and know how to use them, it's not going to help us, especially again in a stressful situation. So I think we're at this important moment in time where there's starting to be the recognition that we've needed for a long time around the impacts in our communities adversely from pollution that have been inappropriately leveled throughout our communities. And so it's time for us to look at how we can invest locally in a way to support ourselves in case of this disaster, and really evolve in the face of climate change in an equitable manner. And I think we have an opportunity to really define some of that future right now, but it's important we do that together. And I think oftentimes when people think about the work we do around efficiency or sustainability, they ask, well, what does that have to do with resiliency? Well, everything is interconnected, and I really try to lead with our work around energy efficiency with occupant health, right? There's so many things that we do that improve buildings that are actually going to improve the health of the people in those buildings. And that's going to have profound longer term impacts. And that's what we're doing at the Resilience Hub. We're making sure we have clean air filters there, that people know they can go there in the event of days where there's fire, there's pollution from the freeways that surround the Boyle Heights community, get clean air. We put in some gardens and some green space. People have access to green space, which is proven to have lots of mental health benefits. And we're trying to build some of that awareness there. And we put in indoor air quality and outdoor air quality monitors, and it provides some real-time sites so people can see what that means for them. So marrying the education with the technology is just so important. So we're excited to be a partner in this and look forward to continuing to work with Marta and her team and a number of the other organizations here to make this work happen throughout the city.
Great, thank you very much. That's a great point to end with, that we have to marry the technology with the people. And this is going to be like one of those speed questions. You know, we talked about the technology, we talked about the people and the social infrastructure and how important the voices are from the local community. This question is to each one of you. Maybe if each of you took like a minute or less, we can have everyone respond. So here's the question. Given the threat of extreme heat in LA, combined with extreme smoke from wildfires across the region, what advice could you give the city in less than a minute to prepare and protect our most disadvantaged neighborhoods? Like, what would you want the city to do? And I know it's a tough challenge to keep it concise, but who would like to start? All right.
I can start.
Gloria, thank you.
I can start, and I'll try to keep it concise. So I want to elevate three things. One of them is prioritize equitable investment. To be able to adapt and recover, it's going to take funding. There's no other way around it. We need to invest, and we need to make sure that that investment is equitable and it gets to the communities that need it the most. Number two, I would elevate again a democratic process. We need to move away from the idea that community members must be offered a seat at the table. I think we need to move to the idea that we need to support community to create their own tables of decision making. So let's elevate and value community expertise. I think we have a lot of expertise in this room. Both I think from the technical standpoint, but also community expertise. They are experts and they're innovative in resilience. They have been resilient for generations in situations that are just really tough. And then the last thing I would say on the most practical side, things that we have heard from our community members, things that they would like are very basic things like increase green space, adding tree canopies in our neighborhoods, water station and train and bus stations, phasing out oil drilling, opening up public recreational spaces, including pool access that is affordable for parents with multiple children, cooling stations, and I would say for us, most importantly, is restructuring utility rates so that folks can afford water, so that folks can afford the energy needed to cool off and to be safe indoors, especially when we have the wildfires. So those are the three main things, and I hope I did that in a minute.
That was great, Gloria. We actually only have 2 minutes left, so I think we can only take one more person at this point. Who has something? Alex, maybe? Because Ben, you were very comprehensive.
Sure, I'm happy to go if Alex doesn't want to. I have some thoughts here as well.
Yeah, I'll keep it super brief. I kind of referenced this in the original discussion, but I think the community input into determining the design of these clean energy technology systems, and more specifically determining the critical loads that are going to be the resource for the community, I think are a very key kind of community input from the onset of these projects. And then there is more community buy-in and awareness that these resources are available.
Can I make one comment?
I have a comment as well.
Go right ahead, Ben.
So the comment I would make was just don't underestimate the impact of low-cost distributed resources. I think we tend to focus too much sometimes on these bigger projects that can just take a long time and can become complex when, if we have a disaster 6 months or a year from now, there's things we could have done to help better prepare people before that. So I don't need to get into what those necessarily are, but there's things we can do that are low cost that we can distribute to people now with the proper education, and let's not underestimate the impact of that. Luis?
Yeah, so I think something to keep in mind here is that in Wilmington and other EJ communities, there aren't any cooling centers in the area, and the closest ones are in Carson or in Long Beach, which aren't even part of LA City anymore. So yeah, it is investment in the resilience hubs themselves, but it's also investment in the projects that are representing community voices, like where the hub should be and what it should prioritize.
We normally go to questions right now, but I don't see any yet. So I'm going to wait for a couple minutes and actually share with all of you that one question that we didn't address that we've been thinking about and we're going to ask in the small groups is, where do you go when there isn't a climate resilience hub or a community center with AC? Where does the community go to cool off, right? Because I think we need to think about not just building more resilience hubs, but what are the natural places people gravitate to and integrate them perhaps in an overall community resilience map, right? So what are your thoughts about that? And let's start with Gloria, since we went through the whole rotation.
So the question is, where do folks go?
Well, if we integrated into a community resilience map where people go and our resilience hubs that we're trying to build as fast as we can so that there's equity across Los Angeles, what would we include? What kinds of buildings would we include in that resilience map?
Yeah, I think that question makes me think again of what I've heard firsthand from community members. I think that we, again, just uplifting that we need to take into account what are some of the other impacts that folks are trying to grapple with. So I think I would say it needs to be in the community, right? A lot of times for resources, we have to travel outside of the community. Even to access fresh food, we have to travel outside of the community. And so as we're talking about economic stability and justice, folks need to make sure that there's something within their own hubs, right? Like, are there churches? Are there community centers? Are there community-based organizations where folks already know and go for other resources? I would say community clinics also. And I just want to elevate the pools because this is some conversation that we've had in the small groups and prior workshops and last week actually. I really maybe haven't thought too much about pools, public pools. But I think I heard some mothers speak about the fact that during COVID, pools were closed and there was still heat waves, right? And so we need to make sure that there are safe places that children can go to. And I think the other thing is the fee, right? That if you have more than one child, the fee can be significant for a family who's on a tight budget. And so thinking about that. And I heard a lot about keeping children safe and keeping children in a space where they can cool off. And some of the moms also elevated like after summer programs, which is not as common, I think, as it used to be, particularly in our city. But how can we invest in summer programs that provide a safe outdoor space for our children while parents are at work, right? And sometimes children are locked up in hot apartments in our communities, and it's a very dangerous situation.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you for elevating pools again, because I do recall that coming up again and again in our conversations. And also I promised to advocate that with Rec and Parks to make pools more accessible, particularly during heat storms, and maybe making them free during heat storms so that people can avoid the heat and have somewhere great to go with their kids. So I do see the questions now. And the first question could be for Ben. Ben, do you think that there's a future for careers and jobs produced by the green economy that will be sustainable, great paying, with great benefits, retirement options? Do you think that that's possible, Ben?
I more than think that's possible. I think that's part of what's been missing out of this conversation from the beginning, the opportunity to decarbonize our communities, to improve our environment, is actually an opportunity to create jobs. It's an opportunity to reduce our long-term operating costs and increase long-term affordability in our communities. And so I think it should be looked at that way. What we need to do around that, though, is also prepare that pipeline of education and identify what those jobs are. I think Grid Alternatives is a great example of an organization that's done a good job of really starting to build that pipeline of people who can be employed in these industries to deliver that in the future. We need to rethink kind of what some of those jobs are, but the reality is so much of the work we do now is going to be work in climate in the future, right? This is going to be us preparing for what that future looks like, whether it's in energy, whether it's in EV charging, and the fact that so many of our buildings and communities need major electrical upgrades in order for those communities to be able to be ready for that. Whether it's in weatherizing our buildings and doing the kind of work that's going to prepare them to reduce energy costs long-term and improve occupant health, that investment will hopefully be coming in some ways from the federal government and from other sources, but these are all things that will reduce our long-term costs, both from an actual energy perspective, but also from a health perspective that really weigh on our community, and from a mental health perspective. There's so many of these issues that we pay larger costs for because we don't prevent the problem up front, and I think this is a moment where we can invest in that.
Great. That's really helpful, Ben. And it just makes me think about, what is the missing link? How do we scale organizations like the ones I have in front of me, CBE, Scope, Grid Alternatives, and yours, so that we can create the jobs locally and in the communities that most need them? I don't know if we have an answer to that, but I think having the financing for scaling organizations is a conversation that's very, very hot right now, that lots of organizations are talking about that balance. So I don't know if Alex, you'd like to address how you think we can scale organizations to create more jobs and more equitable jobs in the communities that most need them.
Well, I think, the industry is already scaling by the year, and
Mm-hmm.
there's job opportunities. It's a rapidly growing industry, and we're seeing more and more interest, especially in traditionally underserved communities. We do so much of our job training almost exclusively in the neighborhoods, like South LA, like Watts, like the Harbor area, because we really have a chance to build something from the ground up in terms of an industry. And it's not just the equitable distribution of these technologies, but it's also equitable access to the jobs that these things are creating. So yeah, Ben mentioned it. I think, we connect up to 80 of our trainees per year to the clean tech industry. So it's scaling, and it continues to scale. And I think it's such a huge opportunity to address a lot of these economic injustices and inequities that we've talked about today.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Luis, would you like to comment on the workforce development aspect of this?
Yeah, definitely. Our survey identified about 5 locations in Wilmington, 3 of them being recreational centers, 2 being churches, and 2 being schools. And we're actually looking to build a hub at Wilmington Middle School this coming year. And folks in the survey also identified that making sure that hours are extended, right? There's folks who said that they could take advantage of the Resilience Hub early in the morning. Others said that they would utilize it overnight. So yeah, an investment of creating jobs really to staff the hub is very crucial, and it would definitely be the community.
I think Ben would like to make one more point before we transition.
Yeah, and I think my point is that so often we point to needing more investment and financing, and some of the challenging things that has to come from public sources, right, that are complex and politically driven. The reason we see solar and storage taking off is because there's an economically viable model that's driving that. And I think what we need to push on as a community is really more about shifting the economic model on a local basis so that it includes the impacts from health impacts of climate change. It includes the challenges that we're facing because we have lack of green infrastructure or lack of clean air, so that we're actually showing that we're going to produce a viable economic return by creating resiliency hubs, by investing in green infrastructure in our communities. We already see that in renewables because it's easier to sort of make that economic argument. And so I think maybe the challenge for us and these groups is to make an economic argument that we can put forward as to why these jobs are going to create long-term value for our communities and how we can reduce our long-term costs.
That's a perfect way to end this, that we want to put forward a paradigm shift in an economic model that's equitable for all and really helps the Los Angeles communities that have been the sacrifice zones and the frontline areas, not because it's the morally right thing to do, because it's a charitable thing to do, but because if we don't do it in that way, with that approach, then we're not going to get to climate solutions for anyone. So thank you all. This was really rich and an amazing discussion, and I'm definitely going to go back and really listen again. I really appreciate all of you. And I think at this point, we're going to have to transition to our next speaker. So thanks again. Well, I'll take the moment then to introduce our next speaker, Rachel Malerich. She is the director of the Urban Forest Management Program within the Board of Public Works at the City of Los Angeles. And she's here to talk to us today about the role of an urban forest and how she has prioritized and building an equity model into her vision and strategy for the City of Los Angeles and its respective urban forest. Rachel, welcome, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Marta. I'm so excited to be with you all this evening. Again, my name is Rachel Malerich, and I'm the City Forest Officer for the City of Los Angeles. Thanks to our Director of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, Marta Segura, and her fantastic team for inviting me to join you tonight. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about my role within the city, some key components about urban forestry work, and a brief overview of one of the really key areas of focus for my office, which is urban forest equity. So just a little bit of my background. I loved hearing from our partners in that previous panel. I worked in the nonprofit sector for 12 years prior to coming to the City of LA to work in the city family, working with communities like those in Wilmington, Huntington Park, South Los Angeles, working in different communities to identify and develop tree planting projects in high need areas with the residents of those communities, looking at where they wanted to prioritize tree planting. As the city's urban forest officer, I'm responsible for facilitating the development of the city's first urban forest management plan. So going from that community organizing role to now being able to say, how do we manage our entire urban forest and ensure that it is healthy, resilient, and equitably distributed? Our urban forest management plan, or UFMP, will define the vision and develop the roadmap for achieving our urban forestry goals for the benefits of our residents. We have many departments within the city, and those departments touch trees in different ways, whether it be our urban forestry division and rec and parks, both providing maintenance and managing our trees in our streets and parks, to planning and building and safety, determining and overseeing development on private property. In my role, I help coordinate across our city departments to ensure that trees and urban forestry best practices are considered as we develop our policies and programs. Next slide, please. So let's talk about trees. I could spend our entire session talking about trees. It's part of the reason I work in the field that I do. And I could be talking about the reasons that they're important for our health of our communities. I think most of us can articulate the benefits that trees provide, and I would bet that all of us have a tree story. I have many, picking and eating fruit in my yard as a kid, walking on the side of the street with the most shade on my way to and from school, climbing trees at my aunt's house with my cousins growing up. A few of my kind of childhood tree stories. All of us have. Some of us may have bad tree stories where a neighbor or a family member tripped on a lifted sidewalk or had a tree branch fall on our first car. So everybody has a tree story. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. But trees as a whole provide us a tremendous amount of benefits, and if we manage them well, provide minimal risk for our neighborhoods. Trees present create a sense of place. They make the places that we live feel like home. They also address the issues that impact us as we live in a city, cleaning our air polluted by cars and industry, as well as providing shade and cooling to provide relief from the urban heat island effect. One of the lesser known benefits of trees is that they help capture stormwater, improve water quality, and reduce flooding in storms. The water hits the leaves and branches of a tree and have a chance to slow down and sink into the soil rather than running off and straight into the storm drain. Another one of my favorite tree benefits I want to highlight is trees not only cool us through shade and reduced absorption of heat on those paved surfaces, that asphalt that can get so hot during the day, but they also cool our neighborhoods at night through the process of transpiration. Trees are really, they're living infrastructure that are providing us benefits both day and night to have our communities be healthy. Next slide, please. But unfortunately, in Los Angeles and in many big cities, not every neighborhood has the same amount of tree canopy. That is the area that's covered by trees in an area. And this is an issue that I've worked on throughout my career, and is actually what originally brought a map like this is what actually originally brought me to work in the field of urban forestry. Mayor Garcetti was the first elected official to set a real goal for us, saying that we should, in the Green New Deal, saying that we should increase tree canopy in areas of greatest need by at least 50% by 2028. And to that end, I'm going to share a little bit about our work on this work to address tree canopy equity and make it so that there aren't just a couple areas of the city that are green. This map here shows the areas that are green and have additional tree canopy cover, and the areas all the way down to red that have really low tree canopy. I will highlight, I like to show folks on the map, there's 2 areas that are red and will probably stay red even after we finish all of our greening efforts. And those are the airport and the areas right around the Port of Los Angeles. I'm not going to be planting trees with you all along the tarmac at LAX. We won't be able to put more trees there, so that area will stay red. But we want to get our neighborhoods where people are living into an area where they have additional access to green space. Next slide, please. As we address the goal of tree canopy equity, we typically think immediately, if we want to have more trees and shade in communities, we need to plant more trees. And that is absolutely true. We do need to plant more trees. But I want to highlight 2 things really quickly before we talk about some of the research that we're doing. One, on this slide, you can see our 4 pillars of urban forest management. We can invest in tree planting, but if we're not also investing in tree maintenance for our existing trees, having resources to take care of our existing trees, having strong policies and practices to do tree preservation or preserving the trees that we have to make sure that we receive their full benefits from those trees over the course of their lives. And then engaging with the communities in both the co-design of our tree planting projects and educating residents on tree care practices, because 80 to 90% of our tree canopy cover is actually found on private property, tree planting and investments. So first baseline, we have to be doing planting, maintenance, preservation, and engagement. We cannot just plant. We will not achieve our goal if we're only planting and not preserving existing trees. In addition to understanding the need to invest in these 4 pillars, I want to emphasize one more area. Next slide, please. So on the right, you see trees in pots about ready to go into the ground in South LA. And these trees all cost the same amount of money, time, energy to plant and have that initial watering that will help them get established. But on the left-hand side, we have this image that shows us the difference between tree species. So on the far left, there's a Western redbud tree, which you plant it, water it, take really good care of it. At its mature age, at its largest size, it will only be 20 feet tall. The tree on the right, the California sycamore, at its mature size will be 80 feet tall, but the initial investment of planting and watering was the same. So how do we make sure that we have more big trees in neighborhoods? It's an issue of having enough space to handle the big tree. We all know, I think we've all seen a sidewalk where you've put in a large tree in a space that was too small, and either the tree is very unhealthy and doesn't look great, or the sidewalk is in really bad shape, having been lifted by the roots of the tree. So we found that in a lot of the communities where we have low tree canopy cover, we also don't have a lot of significant space for large trees in the public right-of-way. So with that, we've been working on some research projects to better understand, one, where we need to be making investments, and what we should be considering in order to achieve the maximum benefit to residents as we make those investments in new tree planting. Next slide, please. One of those projects has been with the University of Southern California, where we have worked with an interdisciplinary team. We've got earth sciences, spatial sciences, landscape architecture, and the university's community relations team that has been looking at the first phase of their project, looked at the communities of Lincoln Heights, Ramona Gardens, and El Sereno to think about where we should be implementing tree planting programs and the kinds of innovations the cities may need to consider. The second phase of their project, which is ongoing at the current moment, is looking at the communities of Boyle Heights and the areas of South Los Angeles around the University Park campus. The image on this slide was one of the renderings from that first phase, looking at a street, I believe in Lincoln Heights, that on the left-hand side shows the existing conditions with one public right-of-way tree and a couple trees on private property. And then on the right-hand side, the enhanced canopy through planting different design spaces in the public right-of-way. This isn't actually planting our existing parkways, but the designers came forward with a couple suggestions on how the city could increase the space available to be able to plant more large stature trees on that street as street trees. And that's really going to be the key for our work moving forward, is being able to say, how do we reach our canopy target, and where do we put the trees, and where do we have space for those trees? And if we don't have enough space, what considerations can we bring forward for both the city staff to consider? Because we do have other infrastructure needs. You see the street lights here and power lines. We also have, the need for cars to pass through the neighborhood and other things like that, and have parking. So having feedback from city staff as well as from the community to say, we're interested in these kinds of trade-offs. We're willing to give up this space that's being used for X thing for additional space for a large shade tree, for example. And so we want to do those co-designs, but we want to come to the community with recommendations that they could react to that give a variety of options, so that they can help design a neighborhood that, again, on the right, thinking of a hot summer day and where you go when it's cool, the university team has said, well, wouldn't it be great if you could go out your front door and have some space there that is going to be 10 to 20 degrees cooler than inside your house on a hot summer day. As part of this research project, they're also helping us understand what tree species, what types of trees, and what configurations of trees provide the most benefit in terms of air quality improvements, which I know are really critical for a number of our high need communities. So next slide, please. I'll just close with one other project that we're working on, and this is looking at, this is our Tree Ambassador program. I know it's not titled here on the slide, but our Tree Ambassador program, which I want to flag, I'm getting to share this, but this is a project that was led predominantly by our partners, City Plants, with the fantastic team that you see here, the funding through LA Department of Water and Power and CAL FIRE, as well as partnership with Climate Resolve, Koreatown Youth and Community Center, Tree People, LA Conservation Corps, and the US Forest Service. This program did what, we heard Gloria Medina earlier highlight the importance of community expertise. And we know that when we're talking to our residents about getting new trees, the best people to deliver that message and to help us understand where the message should be delivered is through residents of that neighborhood. And so the Tree Ambassador program was a 10-month part-time employment opportunity and training program for 12 residents as a pilot. So we're hoping to expand upon it in the future. But it hired 12 residents, and that's what these dots are the locations of the first pilot cohort, what neighborhoods they represented. And so we were looking to leverage community members' knowledge and relationships in their own communities, while also providing them workforce development and training for urban forestry and green jobs. So 13 participants, about 10 months. The course materials from that program are available on the City Plants website, and you all can take a look at those if you'd like to see them in English and in Spanish. But this is, again, us looking at how do we provide training for folks, as well as utilize and compensate that expertise that only comes through being a resident of your community, knowing your neighborhood, knowing your neighbors, and being able to help us identify those needs. And I think that that's where I'll close for now. Again, we have so much work that we're doing on this issue and trying to make sure that we make it so that regardless of what neighborhood you live in, you have access to the benefits trees provide, the protections they provide during extreme heat and other storm events. And look forward to having you all engage and partner with us as we look at the UFMP and tree planting projects within your residence.
That was amazing, Rachel. And there's so much there, but I think I only have time for a couple of questions. My first question is going to be about the Tree Ambassador program, because it sounds very fancy, but the reality is, isn't it a pipeline program to create local careers and jobs in our communities?
Yeah, that's definitely one of the two goals of the program, was to help us start to connect folks with the basic training and education around urban forestry and tree issues, and also preparing them for work in this field. Where there's actually going to be a couple other efforts related to workforce development. Another project of City Plants is their Commonwealth Nursery site, where they're also looking at workforce development related to nursery practices, plant propagation, again, having jobs where people have a chance to get their hands in the dirt, as well as learning on the tree ambassador side, and maybe more community organizing skills, some basics of tree planting and care. That is our goal, is to help people connect with the opportunity to work in this field and have that expertise, not only for their future work, but also left behind in the community when their project service time ends, or potentially being able to keep them longer term.
And I have another question here from Laura Gracia. She's asking, how does your program under the Board of Public Works engage with Indigenous and local leaders to identify and design green spaces together?
That's a great question. So currently I'm not working on designing any specific green spaces. Again, that may be part of the future work with our Urban Forest Equity Collective, which is our other research project related to urban forest equity. One of the components of that project's second phase is looking at is the need for additional park space as a potential option for increasing tree canopy in neighborhoods. I know that a lot of us are already aware for the need for additional green space. This project will be helping to justify further investments in those areas if we find that we cannot put enough shade trees in other spaces. When it comes to engagement with Indigenous communities, I think that there's been a variety of ways that we can engage. I know that the Tree Ambassador program, one of the 10 courses they offered for the participants was Native Los Angeles, a program and curriculum designed, I believe it was, I'm going to forget his name. I'm not going to misquote it, but on their website, they have information on that program that was designed to look at the history of Los Angeles, native plants in this area, and a better understanding of that as part of our training for those participants.
Oh, that's fantastic. And the one last big question that I see here is this tension between greening our neighborhoods and preventing displacement. And I don't expect you to answer that question, but I just want to honor that question was asked. But if you do have any comments on that, we'd be happy to entertain them now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't claim to have all the answers. I do know that every neighborhood in Los Angeles needs to have access to shade and green space. That's right. I know that concerns around gentrification and displacement are huge and have to be considered when you're designing a project. And that community co-design is one of those key elements. It's not a silver bullet. We have to be very thoughtful in how we think about the design of our programs. But my baseline is that every neighborhood that is experiencing, these urban impacts of air quality and heat should have access to shade and tree canopy cover. And that's kind of one of our starting points, knowing that that's an issue. And it's, in workshops that I taught back in, I want to say like 2010, that this was coming up as a question and an issue that we would have to address when we talked with community members about designing thoughtful projects that would retain that sense of place, build on the community that was already there rather than pushing it out.
Yeah. And then my final plug is this. I believe trees and vegetation are by far the best strategy to cool Los Angeles. And I'm really grateful that we have such a robust, urban forestry program. And I look forward to it being much more accessible with the support of CMO and our collaboration, Rachel, in the future. So thank you again for joining us. And I really look forward to our future partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then with that, I think I'm going to transition into the Menti poll and reintroduce Andres Gonzalez and thank all of our panelists and roundtable guests today who did such a phenomenal job and gave us such a rich conversation. So thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Much appreciate that. And we're just going to do a little brief poll just as a kind of in-between activity. So just hearing a lot of the different conversations that we just had, how would you all rate the number of trees in your neighborhood, or how would you qualify almost the tree canopy of your neighborhood? And we're doing this on a little bit differently than before, on a Likert scale, 1 being very low and 5 being really good, really dense, or high number of trees. And if we could, I've just put in the chat a voting link for the Mentimeter. I already see some votes coming in. Thank you all. Menti is a great tool, no? You can also go to menti.com and use the code 28517200. And this will just be a helpful poll to just see, you know, how folks would describe their respective neighborhoods.
So Andres, we just click on the link in the chat space and then move the little slide back and forth to rate.
Exactly. So like this, and then you can just kind of decide which one you want and then just submit.
Great.
Yeah. So we'll give a couple more minutes. I see 31 folks responding. Oh.
That's
I'm
beautiful.
gonna.
This is great information.
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to ask host or Rebecca if you can help me to remove annotation. I would appreciate that.
So as you all are responding, I want to let you know that we want you to stay because we're going to have a small group session that Andres will introduce shortly. And then that's a really critical and important part of this process so that we can get your voices into the recommendations and findings report that will go to the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission. And then I'll announce it again, but at the end, we're going to have a survey. So all of these data points are very important to our work and to ensure that we have recommendations and findings that reflect your perspective.
Hi, our breakout room was amazing. We had a lot of really great just discussion. A lot of what was brought up was the health impacts that really affect older folks, as well as people that have already pre-existing medical issues and babies and really young kids. A lot of the ideas that came up were, of course, the need to be able to support people in bringing in AC units into their dwellings, especially for multi-unit homes, and also making sure that those energy bills also there's support around that, because regardless if those bills, there's no support for that, then folks will not be able to actually use their AC units, making sure that those community resiliency hubs aren't closed during the pandemic, public pools, more trees. Those are some of the key takeaways.
You appreciate that, Anna. Thank you. Definitely hearing kind of needs around senior citizens or folks de la tercera edad, as well as kind of the need around air conditioning rates, which I also heard kind of in different rooms previously. And then just, I think, going back to that issue, an element of access for different spaces, including resilience hubs and pools and public spaces. Thank you, Anna, appreciate that. And then last, if Luis Angel, if you want to kind of share key takeaways, appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, Andres. So we had great conversations in our breakout room regarding the infrastructure of environmental justice communities or low-income communities, that the infrastructure is just not sustainable at the moment, right? There's frequent power outages. Resources are either not accessible or not affordable. And with power outages being frequent, folks who have to stay at home whose power is out, such as the elderly, children, or the disabled, have to be in these very hot homes that maybe their insulation is not the greatest. So so they have to endure these really, really hot days in Los Angeles. And then we also talked about how investing in resilience hubs is just investing in community care, right? Because once that is invested in, there aren't folks having to suffer from extreme heat the way that they do currently. And yeah, it's just sort of mitigating the harm being done by climate emergencies and by the industries that surround these communities as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luis, for that outro. And definitely hearing, I think, infrastructure as a key need that folks highlighted, as well as kind of the synergy of issues that kind of comes out when you have things like, blackouts, especially at key heat waves, right, where it particularly exacerbates certain impacts. I really appreciate that. Appreciate everyone today, especially on our last workshop for part 2. We will be having another third workshop or a final workshop May 12th that we'll share more information on. But Marta, would you like to do the last Menti poll, or would you like to add any other additional comments?
Well, I think I'll just say briefly that those comments were super insightful, and it really does help me think about how to align the city services, the institutional resources with the needs of the community, and be an advocate for those needs within the city of Los Angeles for everything that I've heard here today. And I just want to remind people that that's part of the role of CIMO, is to be an advocate for these community voices. And we're doing it through our blueprint, which is elevating what you're saying through the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission. But in addition to that, you will find me in various meetings throughout City Hall, ensuring that what you're saying in these settings and others like it is being conveyed to other city leaders. So I really want to emphasize that, because this isn't just an exercise in learning, it's an exercise in civic power and civic engagement, and ensuring your voices are heard in all of those spaces. And in fact, city leaders are attending these very workshops, listening to you themselves. And anyway, that's what I think is really unique about this model. So I appreciate everything all of you said. Very well put. And now we're ready for our Menti.
Cool. Thank you all. This will be our outro Menti for part 2, but just a reminder again, we'll be having a part 3 in May 12th. So for this final Menti, we're just curious, what were the main takeaways that stood out to you from this series? It could be things that you saw, projects, ideas that you mentioned, organizing that you saw occur. And I'm going to share in the chat the voting Menti link. So again, the question is, what takeaways stood out to you from this series? ¿Cuáles temas quedaron de importancia para ti de esta serie? And please, this is just another form for us to kind of document some of this information. We're taking notes, providing surveys, and this is just another way for us to be able to kind of document any key takeaways. So it could be from today, and it can be for the past 3 days or the past 2 workshops as well. So I'm seeing again, importance of trees, being a community being able to design their own resilience hub, people being able to design their own resilience hubs, importance of communities often have the solutions, have the answers, use of community gardens to have access to food and green spaces, I think highlighting those great co-benefits, the greater need for green spaces, again, also serving for food access, benefit of shade trees and more green spaces, survival that comes from communities, and the neighbors who help each other out are what makes us okay. 100% on that one, that being kind of one of the greatest forms of care and resiliency. How much consensus there is across participants. We seem to be saying the same things, which is great. Definitely hearing recurring themes, right? I think even seeing in these takeaways, we're starting to see recurring elements come out of what people are highlighting, what needs are highlighting. And to folks who feel more comfortable writing in the chat as well in the Zoom chat, para los que sienten más cómodo usando el chat de Zoom, pon lo que le sobresaltó de estos 3 talleres, Veo María diciendo, lo más notorio es que en verdad tenemos muchas necesidades y hay mucho que hacer, that there's a lot of needs and that we have a lot to do, 100%. And then seeing on the Menti too, we need to, a lot of it's shifting. Let's see if I can scroll this down. Analyzing potential changes from all sides. I think a little bit touching on the intersectional approach, need to help provide more cooling centers, and to be able to have more affordable air conditioning. Sobresalió, thank you. That's a helpful tip on my Spanish. And begin forward thinking to support low-income communities while developing new housing units throughout LA County. Yeah. Creo que todos son importantes porque aprendimos de las necesidades y todo el trabajo y responsabilidad que tenemos en nuestras comunidades. And I believe all of these are important because we because we learned of all the necessities and all the work and responsibility that we need to do for our communities. Hopefully my translations aren't super bad, but I'm trying to just carry the flame, carry the message. Marta, do you have any thoughts? Folks, feel free to continue adding on too. I see little by little.
Well, thank you, Andres. Yes, I wanted to connect this with what the city is currently planning in this next fiscal year. The Department of Emergency Management, the Department of City Planning, and the Climate Emergency Mobilization, in collaboration with other bureaus and departments, are strategizing on creating our own climate vulnerability assessment. And it's going to have social vulnerability as a key element to that, meaning everything that we talked about today, right? What are the risks in our communities? What kinds of burdens are they suffering? What kinds of risks are they experiencing? So we're going to map that social vulnerability. We're going to map the resilience centers. We're going to use the maps that Rachel has created for trees, for example. We're going to map the vulnerabilities of buildings, et cetera. Very similar to what LA County has done. But in addition to having that social vulnerability, we're going to have the hazard mitigation aspect to it, the climate hazard mitigation aspect to it, particularly focused around extreme heat and combined with not just the heat storms, but the smoke storms that come every summer now with the wildfires. We want to make sure that we have this very multifaceted approach, but that we're engaging communities. So you will see us engaging a lot more specifically around the climate risks such as extreme heat, et cetera, in your communities and what we can do about it, because that climate vulnerability assessment is going to lead us to a plan that will include a lot of what we're saying here today, but actually have the tools, the data, the science behind it, so we can, and the mapping behind it, so that we could be a lot more strategic as to where we advise to bring these resilience centers, cooling centers, hubs, and other city resources that you're asking for, including the trees and free access to pools, et cetera. So we hope all of this combined with the climate vulnerability assessment and future community engagement around this issue will actually shape the kind of policy that we need, and that Los Angeles can be that leader to demonstrate to other cities that we can combine climate hazard mitigation, we can combine community voices and the social vulnerability indices to ensure that our plans reflect the needs, the very specific needs of all of our neighborhoods and all of our communities. And so that's a very real way in which what you have said today in the surveys and in these Menti polls and in the small groups is going to lead to change. So I'm very excited about that possibility and about how all of this is going to influence that. And in fact, city planning and the emergency management department have been attending this series as well. But I'd like to also take these last couple of minutes to again thank all of our speakers today, Ben, Alex, Luis, Gloria, and their respective organizations. I want to thank again Liberty Hill for being such a great partner, all the anchor organizations that were part of this series, including Pacoima Beautiful, CBE, and then PSRLA and Lane, and everybody who was part of the Leap LA Coalition and the Repower Coalition, the Neighborhood Council, Sustainability Alliance, our interpreters, our amazing interpreters, and everybody who did facilitation and note-taking. I do want to remind you that April 12th, we're going to be talking about how to align the Justice 40 initiative with climate equity metrics so that the city of LA can show the rest of the world that we can have equitable infrastructure investments that are community-led and where community voices resonate. So that's going to be really important because we want to engage Assemblymember Isaac Bryant and General Manager Capri Maddox and Commissioner Mike Davis on how to create a whole of government approach at the City of Los Angeles, supported by the state initiatives to bring more infrastructure dollars to the communities that most need them. And the registration for that is in the chat space. Rebecca just posted it, but you'll be getting emails about it and more invitations. And that will be our finale. And finally, you will be getting a survey when you close out of this session today. And those surveys are super important because our lead evaluator, Emma French, will be taking all of those surveys and including them into the recommendations and findings report, along with the focus groups, the data, and other information that we feel is super valuable, including the LEAP LA Coalition is having a series of listening sessions that we will also include into this final report that's going to the commission. So it's pretty exciting. I know I've said a lot, but you will be getting copies of not just these recordings and our program and the slides, but when the report is ready, all of you will be the first to get a copy of our report. Well, not before the commission, but you will be among the first to get a copy of the report and see where this is headed. So thank you all again for the great collaboration, for helping us design such an amazing series, and for your commitment and participation. I look forward to seeing you on May 12th for our finale, and then beginning to plan for our next set of series and engagement. Thank you all so much, and have a great evening.